the ability to have somebody who is kind of epitomizes what you think your country stands for has always been a major ambition.
Princess Anne has uncovered hidden documents directly tied to Diana's lost royal collection, a cache of personal letters, private records, and classified correspondence that the palace declared non-existent for nearly 3 decades. The documents were found sealed inside a Windsor archive that nobody had been authorized to open since the weeks immediately following Diana's death in August 1997. What they contain has already forced an emergency meeting between Anne, William, and the King's most senior legal advisors. The archive request that started everything. In the first week of February 2026, Princess Anne submitted a formal written request to the Windsor Castle Archive Administration. The request was specific, documented, and entirely within her authority as a senior working royal with institutional access rights. She asked for permission to review materials held within a sealed storage section on the upper level of the Round Tower Archive, a section that had been formally logged as restricted in October 1997, approximately 6 weeks after the death of Diana, Princess of Wales. The request itself was not unusual on its surface. Anne has accessed the royal archives on multiple occasions over the years, in connection with her work on various institutional and historical projects. She is one of the few senior royals who engages with archival materials with any regularity or genuine scholarly seriousness. Archivists who have worked with her describe her approach as methodical and purposeful. She does not browse. She arrives with specific questions and she leaves with specific answers. What was unusual about this particular request was the section she was asking to access. Because that section had not been opened by any authorized person since the original restriction was placed on it in the autumn of 1997. Nearly 3 decades had passed, multiple monarchs had reigned, multiple archive reviews had been conducted across the wider Windsor collection, and through all of it, that specific sealed section had remained untouched, unreviewed, and in the formal language of the Archive Administration, pending reclassification. Pending reclassification is a phrase that appears frequently in institutional records when materials are sensitive enough to require protection, but the nature of that protection has not been fully decided. It is, in practical terms, a holding category, a way of keeping something locked without having to formally explain why. In most cases, materials sit in that category for a few years before being either released into the broader archive or formally classified under a specific protection framework. Nearly 30 years in pending reclassification is not standard procedure. It is something else entirely. Anne's request was approved after a review period of approximately 11 days. That approval required sign-off from the Lord Chamberlain's office, the senior legal advisor to the royal household, and a representative of the King's private secretary. The fact that 3 separate authorizations were required for a single archive access request tells you something important about what those involved understood to be sitting inside that sealed section. She entered the archive on the morning of February 19th of 2026. She was accompanied by 1 senior archivist and 1 member of the royal household's legal team. No press were present. No statement was prepared in advance. The visit was logged in the archive's internal access records, but was not communicated externally in any form. For approximately 4 hours, Anne worked through the materials contained in the sealed section with the methodical attention that people who know her have come to expect. What she found in those 4 hours set in motion a chain of events that is still unfolding. Sources with direct knowledge of the archive visit have confirmed that the seal section contained materials belonging to what palace insiders have referred to for years in hushed and careful terms as Diana's lost royal collection. That phrase has circulated in royal correspondence circles for decades. It has appeared in fragments in several published accounts of the period immediately following Diana's death. It has been referenced obliquely in at least 2 official inquiries without ever being directly addressed or formally acknowledged. The palace has consistently declined to confirm or deny its existence whenever the question has been raised. The existence of the collection is no longer a matter of speculation. Anne found it. The archive records confirm she accessed it. and the emergency meeting that followed her visit, convened within 72 hours and attended by Anne, William, and 3 of the palace's most senior legal advisors, confirms that what she found was significant enough to require immediate institutional response at the highest level. The question that has been driving every conversation inside the palace since February 19th is not whether the collection exists. That question has been answered. The question now is what the collection contains, why it was sealed in the first place, and what the palace is going to do about the fact that it has been found. To answer those questions properly, you first need to understand what Diana's lost royal collection actually was. Because the story of what Anne uncovered in that archive begins not in February 2026, but in the months and years before Diana's death, when she was assembling something that the palace never wanted to become a matter of record. What that collection was and why it frightened the institution enough to seal it for nearly 30 years is where this investigation truly begins. Diana's lost royal collection, what it was, and why it disappeared. To understand the full weight of what Princess Anne uncovered inside that Windsor archive, you have to go back. Not to the night of August 31st, 1997, when Diana's car crashed in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel in Paris. Not to the days of public mourning that followed, when millions of flowers were laid outside palace gates and a nation grieved in a way that shook the institution to its foundations. You have to go back further than that. Back to the years when Diana was still alive, still fighting, and still assembling a record of everything she had witnessed, experienced, and survived inside the British royal family. Diana Spencer entered the royal family as a 19-year-old in 1981. She married Charles, Prince of Wales, in a ceremony watched by approximately 750 million people worldwide. She was young, largely unprepared for the reality of royal life, and entering an institution that had its own established rules, its own internal culture, and its own deeply embedded ways of managing people who did not fit its expectations. Within a few years, it became clear to those around her that Diana did not fit those expectations in any comfortable way. She was too emotional for a family that prized reserve, too public in her warmth at a time when the monarchy still maintained careful distance from the people it served, too honest about her own suffering in an environment where suffering was managed privately and presented publicly as composure. And as her marriage deteriorated through the mid-1980s and into the early 1990s, she began to do something that the palace found deeply unsettling. She began to keep records. This was not a casual habit. Sources who were close to Diana during the final decade of her life have described her documentation instinct as deliberate and systematic. She kept personal diaries that went well beyond the ordinary recording of daily events. She retained correspondence, both letters she received and copies of letters she sent, including communications with palace officials, senior courtiers, and members of the royal family itself. She collected what one former aide described as institutional evidence, documentation of decisions made about her, conversations she had been party to, and formal communications from the palace machinery that she believed told a story very different from the one the institution was presenting publicly. She also retained materials of a different kind entirely, items connected to her official royal role that she believed had been mismanaged, misappropriated, or quietly removed from her custody without her formal consent during the period of her separation from Charles. These included personal gifts received during official state visits, private correspondence from foreign heads of state addressed to her specifically in her capacity as Princess of Wales, ceremonial items presented to her by charitable organizations she had patronized, and documentation related to her official royal duties that she argued belonged to her personal archive rather than to the institutional record. Together, these materials formed what Diana referred to in at least 2 documented conversations with trusted advisors as her collection. Not a collection in the decorative sense, a collection in the evidentiary sense. A body of material that she believed told the true story of her time inside the royal family, and that she was determined to protect. The question of what happened to that collection after Diana's death in August 1997 has never been formally answered. In the immediate aftermath of the crash, the palace moved quickly to secure Diana's personal effects at her London residence, Kensington Palace. A team of senior courtiers and legal representatives was dispatched within days to conduct what was described officially as an inventory of the princess's personal property for the purposes of probate administration. That inventory, or more precisely the full contents of that inventory, has never been made public. What is documented is that Diana's estate was administered under the terms of her will, with her mother, Frances Shand Kidd, and her sister, Lady Sarah McCorswedale, named as executors. The bulk of her personal estate passed to her two sons, William and Harry, held in trust until they reached adulthood. Her personal jewelry, her clothing, her private correspondence addressed in a personal rather than official capacity, these were accounted for in the probate process to the extent that the public record shows. But sources who were involved in or adjacent to the estate administration process have consistently maintained in private conversations documented over more than 2 decades that not everything was accounted for in the way the official record suggests. That certain materials, specifically those connected to what Diana had assembled as her institutional record, were removed from Kensington Palace in the days immediately following her death and placed under palace control rather than passing through the formal probate process as personal property. One former senior courtier, speaking to a royal correspondence in 2023 under condition of anonymity, described the removal of materials from Kensington Palace in the week after Diana's death as the most aggressive piece of institutional housekeeping he had ever witnessed. That phrase, institutional housekeeping, is the language of someone who understood exactly what was happening and chose his words with extreme care. The materials that were removed, or at minimum separated from the formal estate process, are what palace insiders eventually came to refer to as Diana's lost royal collection. Lost not because anyone misplaced them, lost because the institution made a deliberate decision that they should not be findable. They were transported to Windsor, logged under a classification that ensured they would not appear in any publicly accessible inventory, and placed in the sealed section of the Round Tower Archive under the pending reclassification and designation that kept them invisible for nearly 30 years, until February 19, 2026. Until Anne walked in with a legal advisor and an archivist and 4 hours to work through what had been buried. What she found inside those sealed containers is the chapter of this story that the palace is most urgently trying to control. And it is the chapter that changes everything about how the next decade of this monarchy will unfold. What the hidden documents actually contain. There is a particular kind of silence that falls inside an institution when something buried for decades is suddenly brought into the light. It is not the silence of innocence. It is the silence of people calculating very quickly what the emergence of certain information means for them, for their decisions, and for the version of history they have spent years carefully maintaining. That silence descended on the upper levels of the royal household's administrative structure within hours of Anne completing her review of the sealed Windsor archive on February 19, 2026. The materials Anne found inside that sealed section have been described by sources with direct knowledge of the archive visit in terms that are consistent across multiple separate accounts. The collection is substantial. It is organized, and it is, by every indication available, exactly what Diana intended it to be. A comprehensive, deliberately assembled record that tells a story the palace has never wanted told. The first category of materials consists of personal correspondence. Letters written by Diana to senior members of the royal family, to palace officials, and to individuals within the institutional machinery of the monarchy during the period between her formal separation from Charles in December 1992 and her death in August 1997. These are not informal notes. They are substantive communications, some running to several pages, in which Diana documented her understanding of specific decisions, challenged specific actions taken against her, and recorded her own account of conversations and events that the palace's internal record describes very differently. Among the correspondence sources indicate are letters addressed directly to the late Queen Elizabeth II, letters in which Diana raised specific concerns about her treatment by the palace machinery, about the management of her public role during the separation period, and about decisions being made regarding her sons that she believed were being taken without adequate consultation with her as their mother. Whether those letters received formal responses And if so, what those responses contained is itself a significant question. Because if the sealed collection includes both Diana's letters and replies from the palace, the documentary record of that relationship during its most difficult period is considerably more complete than anyone outside a very small circle has ever known. The second category of materials is more operationally significant in the immediate term. It consists of internal palace documents that Diana appears to have obtained or retained during her time as a working royal. Memoranda, formal communications between senior courtiers, briefing notes prepared for the Queen and other senior royals, and administrative records relating to decisions about Diana's official role, her public engagements, her security arrangements, and her access to royal resources during the separation and divorce period. Sources familiar with the contents of these documents describe them as providing a detailed internal view of how the palace managed Diana as an institutional problem during the final years of her life. The language used in some of these internal communications, according to one source who has been briefed on specific contents, is striking in its clinical detachment. Diana is referred to in ways that reflect an institutional calculation rather than a family consideration. Decisions about her are framed in terms of reputation management, public positioning, and damage limitation, rather than in terms of her welfare or her rights as the mother of the heir to the throne. Whether those documents were legitimately retained by Diana as personal property or removed from official palace files without authorization is itself a question with significant legal implications. It is one of the questions that the emergency meeting convened by Anne in late February 2026 was specifically convened to address. The third category of materials is the one that has generated the most urgent private discussion among the legal advisors now involved in reviewing the collection. It consists of what sources describe as Diana's personal testimony documents. These are not letters addressed to specific individuals. They are written accounts, some dated, some not, in Diana's own hand, describing specific events, specific conversations, and specific decisions that she witnessed or was party to during her years inside the royal family. Think carefully about what that means. Diana was a witness to the inner workings of the British royal family at one of the most turbulent periods in its modern history. She was present in rooms, party to conversations, and recipient of communications that touched on some of the most sensitive institutional decisions of the late 20th century. If she documented what she saw, heard, and experienced in personal testimony form, with dates, names, and specific detail, the historical significance of those documents is extraordinary. Sources indicate that the testimony documents cover a range of subjects. Some relate to her marriage and its breakdown. Some relate to her relationship with her sons and the institutional management of their upbringing. Some relate to specific public controversies of the period, including the management of the Charles and Camilla relationship, and the palace's internal response to the public revelation of that relationship. And some, according to one source who chose their words with notable deliberateness, relate to matters that go beyond the personal and touch on institutional decisions whose full implications have never been publicly examined. That last category is the one that explains the emergency meeting. That last category is the one that explains why 3 of the palace's most senior legal advisors were convened within 72 hours of Anne completing her archive review. And that last category is the one that the palace is now working with urgent and focused attention to assess before any question of public disclosure is formally raised. There is a fourth element to the collection that must be mentioned, though sources have been most cautious about this particular component. Among the materials found in the sealed section are items that appear to relate to Diana's personal royal collection in the physical sense. Documentation relating to specific gifts, ceremonial items, and personal effects that Diana maintained were her personal property, but that were removed from her custody during the separation period or in the immediate aftermath of her death. Some of these items have never appeared in any public inventory. Their current location, if they still exist in physical form, is not known from the documents alone. What the documents do establish, according to sources briefed on the archive contents, is that Diana formally and repeatedly objected to the removal of these items. She raised the matter in writing with palace officials on at least 3 separate occasions. The responses she received, where responses exist in the collection at all, are described by sources as either dismissive or procedurally evasive. The items were never formally returned to her custody. Anne spent 4 hours in that archive on February 19th. She left with a comprehensive understanding of what the collection contains and a clear sense of what its existence means for the institution she has spent her entire life serving. She did not remove any materials from the archive. She did not communicate with the press. She convened a meeting, and she presented what she had found to the people who needed to know. The question of what the palace does next is not simply an administrative question. It is a moral one. And it is one that William, who was 8 years old when his parents separated, and 15 when his mother died, now has to answer. The palace's role in what was concealed. The documents Anne pulled from that sealed archive did not simply raise questions. They answered ones that had been circulating inside informed royal circles for years. And the answers pointed not to negligence, not to administrative oversight, but to a deliberate, coordinated effort to ensure that certain materials from Diana's collection never entered the public record. The paper trail Anne now held in her hands made that sequence of decisions visible in a way that no spokesperson, no royal biographer, and no palace-commissioned review had ever allowed before. In the weeks immediately following Diana's death in August 1997, the palace moved with a speed that observers at the time found striking. Grief was performed publicly and managed carefully. But behind closed doors, a parallel operation was already underway. Senior advisors inside Buckingham Palace and St. James's Palace coordinated the gathering and cataloging of Diana's personal effects with a thoroughness that went well beyond routine estate administration. According to the documents Anne reviewed, specific items from the collection were flagged within 72 hours of the funeral. They were not flagged for preservation. They were flagged for reclassification. The distinction matters enormously. Preservation means an item enters the royal archive under its own description, traceable, catalogued, potentially subject to future disclosure requests. Reclassification means the item is absorbed into a broader administrative category, stripped of its specific identifying details, and effectively made invisible to anyone searching the record with Diana's name. It is not destruction, it is erasure by bureaucratic procedure. And according to the materials Anne uncovered, it was applied selectively and deliberately to a defined subset of Diana's collection. The question of who authorized those decisions is the one that cuts deepest. The documents do not contain a single dramatic signed order from one identifiable figure. What they contain is something more unsettling, a chain of written communications between senior courtiers, spanning approximately 6 weeks after the funeral, in which the reclassification decisions are discussed, refined, and ultimately confirmed by consensus. The names attached to those communications represent some of the most senior institutional figures of that era. Several of them went on to serve in prominent advisory roles well into the 2000s. At least 2 were still active in royal household structures within the last decade. What specifically prompted the reclassification of those particular items? The documents suggest 2 overlapping concerns. The first was legal exposure. Diana had, in the final years of her life, been involved in correspondence and documentation relating to matters the palace considered legally sensitive. Some of this touched on the terms of her divorce settlement. Some of it touched on communications with individuals outside the family, whose public statements, if corroborated by palace-held documents, could have created significant problems for the institution. The second concern was reputational, and it was the one that drove the harder decisions. Certain items in Diana's collection, according to the internal communications Anne reviewed, contained material that reflected directly on the conduct of senior family members during the years of the marriage's collapse. The palace's assessment, documented in writing, was that allowing those materials to remain traceable in the archive created an unacceptable long-term risk. The mechanism they used was not illegal on its face. Royal household archiving procedures have always included broad discretionary powers around the classification of sensitive materials. What made the 1997 operation significant was the scale and the intentionality. This was not a single cautious archivist making a conservative call about a handful of sensitive letters. This was a structured process involving multiple senior figures, applied systematically to a curated list of items, with a documented rationale that explicitly referenced the need to prevent certain narratives from gaining documentary support. Anne, reading through those communications inside that sealed room at Windsor, would have understood immediately what she was looking at. Not chaos, not grief-driven disorder, a plan. There is one further layer that the documents reveal, and it is the one that carries implications beyond the 1997 decisions themselves. The reclassification was not treated as a closed matter once it was completed. The internal communications show that the question of those materials was revisited at least twice in subsequent years. The first revisit occurred around 2004, when renewed public interest in Diana, driven partly by approaching anniversary coverage and partly by ongoing legal proceedings related to the Paris crash, prompted a quiet internal review of what the archive contained and what risk it still posed. The second revisit is less precisely dated in the documents, but appears to fall somewhere between 2010 and 2013. In both cases, the conclusion reached internally was the same. The reclassification should stand. The materials should remain in their suppressed form. That conclusion was reached by people operating inside a palace structure that has since changed considerably in its personnel. Several of the key figures from the original 1997 operation are dead. Others are retired, but the decisions they made are still in effect. The materials they reclassified are still sitting in the form they were placed in nearly 3 decades ago. And Princess Anne, standing in that archive in early 2026, was now one of the very few people alive who had read the full documented record of how it all happened and who had made it so. William's reaction and what he does next. Anne did not go to the press. She did not go to a lawyer. She went to William. The briefing she gave him was, by any measure, one of the most consequential private conversations between 2 senior royals in recent memory. Anne is not given to dramatics. She is precise, institutional in her framing, and deeply aware of the weight that certain kinds of information carry once they are spoken aloud inside the wrong rooms. What she brought to William was not gossip and not speculation. It was documented evidence of decisions made at the highest levels of the institution he is preparing to lead. Decisions made in the name of protecting the crown. Decisions that concerned his mother directly. William's relationship with the palace's handling of Diana's legacy has always been complicated in ways the public has only ever seen the surface of. He has spoken carefully about his grief. He has supported memorial initiatives. He has drawn lines, quietly but firmly, around what he will and will not revisit in public. But the documents Anne placed before him crossed all of those lines simultaneously. This was not tabloid narrative. This was not biographer interpretation or campaigner allegation. This was internal palace correspondence, signed by real people, describing real decisions made with deliberate intent to ensure that certain truths about his mother's final years remained permanently buried. The confrontation it has triggered inside the palace is not yet fully visible from the outside, but what is clear is that William did not receive this information and set it aside. He is a man who has staked his entire public identity as Prince of Wales on a reform agenda, on transparency, on breaking with the institutional reflexes that defined the monarchy of his grandparents' generation. The existence of those documents cuts directly against everything he has publicly committed himself to. He cannot unknow what he now knows, and the question of what he does next is one the palace is already, quietly and urgently, trying to manage. What this means for Diana's legacy and the monarchy's future. Princess Anne did not stumble into that archive. She requested it. She knew or strongly suspected that something was in there waiting to be found. And in making that request, in doing what the institution had spent 28 years hoping no one with sufficient access and sufficient nerve would ever do, she changed the internal landscape of the monarchy in ways that cannot be quietly reversed. Diana's legacy has always existed in 2 registers simultaneously. There is the public one, the photographs, the speeches, the humanitarian work, the grief of an entire nation poured into the streets of London in August 1997. And there is the private one, the one the palace has always worked hardest to control, the one that lives in correspondence and documentation and the recorded details of decisions made behind closed doors when no cameras were present. What the documents Anne found represent is a direct and documented bridge between those 2 registers. They do not change what the world knows about Diana, but they change what the palace can claim it did not know, did not do, and did not choose. For the institution's future, the implications pull in two directions at once. On one side is the pressure toward disclosure. Anne's discovery, and William's knowledge of it, creates an internal reckoning that cannot simply be managed into silence the way the original reclassification was managed nearly 3 decades ago. The people who made those 1997 decisions are gone from positions of influence. The institutional culture that made those decisions possible is precisely what William has spent years arguing must be dismantled. Continuing to sit on materials of this significance, while publicly championing a new era of openness, is a position that becomes harder to hold the longer the knowledge exists at the level it now does. On the other side is the institutional gravity that has always pulled the monarchy towards self-protection above all else. Disclosure of documents this sensitive would not simply illuminate the past. It would open questions about accountability, about the legal standing of the reclassification decisions, about whether the individuals named in those communications or their estates carry any liability for what was done, about what other materials in the Royal Archive might exist under similar conditions of deliberate suppression. Those are not small questions. They are exactly the kind of questions that palace legal and communication structures have been built across generations to prevent from ever being asked in public. What Anne's intervention signals above everything else is that the internal consensus around silence is fracturing. For nearly 3 decades, the institution held together around an unspoken agreement that certain things about Diana's collection and what happened to it would not be examined too closely by those with the access and authority to examine it properly. Anne has broken that agreement, not loudly, not in front of cameras, but permanently. And in doing so, she has placed the next chapter of this story not in the hands of journalists or campaigners or documentary makers, but in the hands of the future king himself. What William chooses to do with what he now knows will define not just how Diana is remembered by history, but what kind of institution he is genuinely building, and whether the monarchy's stated commitment to a new era carries any real meaning at all when the price of honesty turns out to be this high. Diana's collection was never truly lost. It was hidden. And the difference between those two things is the difference between an institution that made mistakes in grief and one that made decisions in cold calculation. What the archive revealed is that the palace chose, deliberately and repeatedly, to ensure that certain truths about Diana's life would never find their way into the light.